And now John McCain, as I mentioned, could be getting some of those answers to those very questions as James Mattis is heading to the Hill. Let me bring in right now, though, joining to discuss, Democratic Congressman Mike Quigley of Illinois, a member of the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman, thanks for coming in.
Good morning.
Good morning. The FBI now being involved in the Niger investigation. What is the biggest question in your mind right now with regard to this ambush?
What was the intel information offered to the troops before they hit the ground? Were there communication issues? Is it true that one of the sergeants was separated from the rest? Clearly we have more questions than answers. We've only got a cursory briefing giving the time for Intel Committee staffers. We anticipate a fuller briefing shortly from my committee, the Intel Committee, and I'm sure Armed Services.
Do you know when that will be happening? I mean, James, the Defense Secretary is going to sit down with John McCain today. When do you think you will all be fully briefed, even in the classified setting?
Yeah, I suspect it'll probably be in the coming week when we're back in Washington, D.C. I suspect still it will be cursory because this investigation is going to take some time, and there'll be multiple investigations within the Department of Defense, as there are in all such instances, such as the Yemen raid, which unfortunately was a tragedy of equal proportions. So I suspect we'll get a cursory briefing to some extent next week, and then continued briefings as DOD learns more, and hopefully sharing this information with the other committees that have responsibility. Do
you think in any way DOD has been, I don't know a better way of saying it, holding out? I mean, John McCain was very frustrated that he hasn't gotten the information he thinks he's deserved already.
I think this administration as a whole has been opaque at best on anything. Clearly the President of the United States doesn't like to take responsibility for anything that goes wrong. I can't think of a single time in which he has said, this was my fault, my responsibility. We think of President Kennedy after the Bay of Pigs, a highly different story than this president after the Yemen raid, in which he publicly blamed the generals. And look, this is going to get more complicated. We have known for some time of the likely demise on the battlefield in Iraq and Syria of ISIS. But we also recognize that it's going to have its ramifications elsewhere. We're going to see returning fires going across the world in terrorist acts. We're probably going to see insurgency acts like we just saw. This is an insurgency group likely formed because of the battlefield losses in Iraq and Syria. We're going to have to be prepared for that. Do we have the information we need? Do we have a strategy in place to fully meet this challenge?
Well, there are clearly so many answers still being sought there. What do you make of how this has devolved this week from a question about the President's thoughts on the Niger attack at a press conference Monday to now name-calling between the President and his Chief of Staff and a Democratic member of Congress?
Yeah, it is a second tragedy for those families who have lost their members. It should never have happened this way. The fact of the matter is, when something like this happens, immediately the House and Senate need to be informed. The American public needs to know exactly what took place to the extent we can tell them. And those that were lost need to be comforted and offered assistance. The second tragedy for these families is they are dragged through this horrible, embarrassing mess that I suspect just pours salt on terrible wounds they're already suffering.
Well, Congressman,
I have to tell you,
if the President
I don't see this President other than being...
If the President made this political, Congressman, does Congresswoman Wilson deserve criticism as well for making it political and continuing it as well?
Look, I don't want to reference John Kelly because of his loss, and I wasn't part of the conversation with the Congresswoman. So if you're asking me who do I believe in this matter, it's probably the family that was part of that conversation and agrees with the Congresswoman. So if you're asking me how to do this on a nonpartisan basis, I'd suggest that we should probably all trust the grieving families and their account of what took place, which would agree with the Congresswoman. Let me just say this. This is a president that cannot sympathize or empathize with those who have suffered. And as a result, perhaps what they should do is in what they try to tell, his staff tries to tell him when he talks to grieving families, is let's reference a president who seemed to know how to do this, quoting perhaps President Lincoln's letter, the Bixby letter, in which he says, "I pray that our Heavenly Father may assuage the anguish of your bereavement and leave you only the cherished memory of the loved and lost, and the solemn pride that must be yours to have laid so costly a sacrifice upon the altar of freedom." If he can't do it, at least reference a president who could.
Congressman, thank you so much for coming on. I've got many questions, especially on where the Russia investigation goes when you return to Capitol Hill, but we'll leave those for another day. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Glad to join you.
Thank you.